Elias Thorne had not spoken aloud to another living soul in 47 days when the wagon creaked into view. Its canvas top bleached the color of old bone by the sun that ruled the high plains like a tyrant. He stood on the warped porch of his cabin, one boot heel hooked on the lower rail, the other planted firm in the grit, and watched the vehicle crawl closer until the mules hauling it looked no larger than ants pulling a bread crust. 47 days of silence had taught him the precise pitch of every wind that scoured the valley, the exact hour the coyotes began their evening argument. The way a man's own heartbeat could sound like a stranger knocking if you listened long enough. He had measured time by the slow erosion of his solitude, and now the calendar had finally delivered its verdict. Today, the woman he had ordered like a sack of flour would arrive. The wagon stopped 30 yards out. The driver, a wiry man named Pike, who ran mail and freight between the railhead and the scattered ranches, hopped down and looped the reins over the brake. He did not wave. Pike had learned long ago that Elias preferred the economy of gestures. A nod was currency enough. Elias returned it, then fixed his gaze on the canvas flap at the rear of the wagon. A shadow moved behind it, large, deliberate, unhurried. The mules shifted, sensing weight. Elias felt the boards beneath his boots vibrate with the first footfall before he heard it. She emerged backward, one massive hand gripping the iron hoop for balance, the other steadying a carpet bag the size of a calf. When she turned, the sun caught the full measure of her and flung it back at Elias like a dare. Minerva McAllister stood 6'6" in her stocking feet and carried the kind of bulk that made mountains look negotiable. Her traveling dress, a sturdy brown wool that had probably begun life as a bolt of tent canvas, strained at every seam, yet somehow managed to look regal. The way a warship looks regal, even when barnacles cling to its hull. A bonnet, the circumference of a wagon wheel, framed a face broad and calm as a prairie after rain. She surveyed the cabin, the corral, the endless grass, and finally Elias himself, with eyes the color of winter river ice. Then she smiled. Not the timid smile of a bride meeting her purchaser, but the slow, deliberate smile of a woman who had already decided the world would have to adjust its expectations. Elias felt the silence he had cultivated for 7 years crack like thin ice under a horse's hoof. He opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. "Ma'am," he managed, the words scraping out rusty as a hinge. "Mr. Thorne," Minerva replied, her voice rolling across the yard like distant thunder that promised rain instead of ruin. She descended the wagon steps, 3 of them, built extra wide by Pike for just this purpose, and the ground seemed to sigh beneath her. Pike unhitched her trunk, a monstrous oak and iron thing that took both him and the mules to wrestle down. He tipped his hat to Elias, climbed back aboard, and was gone before the dust had time to think about settling, leaving the rancher and the giantess alone in the vast hush of the plains. Elias had pictured this moment 1,000 times since mailing the matrimonial agency's fee 6 months earlier. In every imagining, the woman was small, delicate, grateful, someone who would fit inside the narrow corridors of his life without rearranging the furniture. He had written the advertisement himself, laboring over each word with a stub of pencil. Widower 38, solvent, seeks Christian lady of quiet habits for companionship and help on remote ranch. No children. Much like dogs, he had expected a sparrow. What stepped off the wagon was a storm. Minerva set the carpetbag down and rolled her shoulders the way a boxer loosens before a bout. "I reckon you're wondering if the agency sent the right parcel," she said, amusement threading her tone like gold through quartz. Elias found his voice hiding somewhere near his boots. "Letter said 5'2", 120 pounds. Letter was wrong. She lifted the trunk as if it were a hat box and carried it toward the porch. Elias moved to help and found his arms unnecessary. The woman hoisted the thing onto the railing with a grunt that sounded more satisfied than strained. "I wrote the truth. Some clerk in Chicago must have thought it a prank and shaved off a foot and 100 pounds to make me marriageable. I let it stand. Figured a man desperate enough to order a wife sight unseen wouldn't quibble over details once I arrived. Desperate. The word struck Elias like a branding iron. He had not thought of himself that way. But the ledger did not lie. 7 years since Clara died in childbirth, along with the son he never held. 7 years of meals cooked for one. Of nights when the wind through the chinks sounded like a woman weeping. Of mornings when the mirror showed a man whose eyes had forgotten how to expect anything but weather. The ranch had prospered. 300 head of longhorns, a spring that never failed, a sod barn tight enough to winter calves. But prosperity without witness felt like a joke told to an empty room. Minerva studied him with the frank appraisal of a woman who had spent years being stared at. "You're taller than I pictured," she said. "Most men shrink when they see me coming." "I don't shrink easy," Elias said, and was surprised to find it true. "Good. We'll get along." She extended a hand the size of a dinner plate. Elias took it. Her grip was warm, calloused, steady as bedrock. "Now, Mr. Thorne, I've been cooped in wagons and trains for 12 days. If you've got coffee that isn't boiled boot leather and a place to set my bones, I'd be obliged." He led her inside. The cabin was a single room, divided by imagination. Cook stove and table on one side, rope bed and trunk on the other, a loft above reached by a ladder whittled from cottonwood. Elias had swept the puncheon floor that morning, a concession to the bride he had expected. Dust still clung to the rafters like stubborn cobwebs of habit. He pumped water into the kettle, measured coffee from a tin that had once held peaches, and tried not to stare as Minerva removed her bonnet and revealed hair the color of fresh-cut wheat, braided thick as a hawser. She moved through the space with surprising grace, ducking beneath the low beam as if she had practiced the maneuver in 100 doorways. "Cozy," she said, and meant it. "Reminds me of the soddy my pa built when I was knee-high to a grasshopper. Only difference is he had 7 of us crammed in like pickles in a jar." Elias set 2 tin cups on the table. "You come from a big family?" Big in every sense," she laughed, a sound like a cello string plucked in a canyon. "Ma birthed 9. I'm the runt," the kettle sang. Elias poured. Steam curled between them like incense at a ritual neither had agreed to perform. He watched her cradle the cup in hands that could have snapped his forearm like kindling. Yet the way she sipped was delicate, almost reverent. "Agency said you're from Missouri," he ventured, "born and raised on a hog farm outside Joplin. Pa died 2 winters back, Ma followed last spring. Brothers scattered, 2 to the mines, 1 to the railroad, the youngest to the army. Land sold for taxes. I taught school for a spell, but folks get twitchy when the teacher has to stoop to write on the blackboard." She set the cup down. "Figured I'd try my luck where a woman my size might be useful instead of ornamental." Elias felt the ground shift again, the way it did before a gully washer. Useful. No one had ever offered him usefulness wrapped in such a package. Clara had been all lace and apologies, her hands too small to grip a fence post, her laughter bright but brittle. Minerva looked like she could wrestle a steer and then bake it into a pie. Outside, the dog began to bark. Buck, the blue heeler mix, who had appointed himself guardian of the ranch after Elias found him half-starved as a pup. The barking rose to a frenzy, then cut off with a yelp. Elias reached for the rifle above the door. "Stay inside," he told Minerva. She was already moving. "Not likely." They stepped onto the porch together. Buck cowered beside the corral, tail tucked, staring at something in the cottonwoods that fringed the creek. Elias saw it then. A grizzly, old and sway-backed, its winter coat hanging in rags, nosing along the water's edge. Bears were rare this far east of the mountains, driven down by hunger or sickness. This one looked like it had lost a fight with fate and was spoiling for another. Elias levered around into the Winchester. "Get back in the house." Minerva laid a hand on his arm. "That rifle'll just make him mad. Look at him, he's half dead already, probably after the salt lick." The bear raised its head, yellow teeth bared in a yawn that showed more exhaustion than threat. It took one shambling step toward the corral where the milk cow lowed in terror. Elias sighted down the barrel. His finger tightened. Minerva moved faster than her size suggested possible. She snatched a coil of rope from the porch post, fashioned a loop with hands that knew the work, and in 3 strides was between the bear and the cow. "Hey there, old man," she called, voice steady as a preacher's. "Ain't nothing here worth your trouble." The bear hesitated, confused by the sheer audacity of a human planting herself in its path. Minerva began to sing, low, rolling, a hymn Elias almost recognized from childhood. She swung the rope in lazy circles. Advancing 1 step for every 2, the bear retreated. Elias stood frozen, rifle forgotten. The bear huffed, turned, and lumbered back into the cottonwoods, disappearing as completely as a bad dream at dawn. Minerva coiled the rope and hung it back on its nail. Buck slunk over and licked her hand. The milk cow ceased its bellowing. Somewhere a meadowlark took up its evening song. Elias found his voice. "You just stared down a grizzly with nothing but a rope and a hymn. Pa always said the good Lord gave us size for a reason. Might as well use it." She wiped her hands on her skirt. "Besides, that bear's more scared of me than I am of him. Hunger makes fools of us all." Night fell hard the way it does on the plains. One moment twilight, the next a velvet darkness pricked by stars sharp enough to draw blood. Elias lit the lamp. Its glow turned the cabin into a small island. He showed Minerva the loft where he had stored Clara's things, trunk, quilt, a cradle never used. "You'll sleep up there," he said. "I'll take the floor." "Nonsense." She eyed the rope bed, tested the frame with one hand. It creaked but held. "This'll do for both of us if we're mindful. I've shared narrower with sisters who kicked like mules." Elias felt heat rise in his face. "Ma'am, Minerva, and I'm not suggesting anything improper. Just practicality. Floor's hard on a man's bones, and I've no intention of starting married life with you grumbling about lumbago." She climbed the ladder with the ease of long practice, her weight making the rungs sing. From above came the rustle of petticoats, the thud of boots hitting the planks. "Light's wasting, Elias. Blow it out and come to bed." He stood in the dark longer than necessary, listening to the cabin settle around the new weight of her presence. When he finally lay down on his side of the bed, the mattress dipped like a rowboat taking on water. Minerva's breathing was slow even, the sound of a woman who had earned her rest. Elias stared at the underside of the roof until the rafters blurred. Sometime past midnight, he woke to find her arm thrown across his chest, heavy as a saddle, yet gentle in its carelessness. He did not move it. Outside, the wind had died, and the silence felt different now, shared, almost companionable. He thought of the bear retreating into the trees, of the way Minerva had filled the doorway like a promise kept. Sleep returned, deeper than any he could remember. Morning came with the smell of coffee and the sizzle of fatback. Elias opened his eyes to find Minerva already at the stove, her braids swinging like a pendulum as she flipped flapjacks the size of wagon wheels. Sunlight poured through the open door, gilding the dust motes that danced around her. "Rise and shine, Mr. Thorne," she said without turning. "We've got a ranch to run and a marriage to commence. I found your preacher's book in the trunk." Page's dog-eared at the wedding service. "Reckon we can read our own vows and let the Lord sort the paperwork later." Elias sat up, ran a hand through hair that had not seen a comb in days. "You always this decisive before breakfast?" "Only when I'm hungry." She slid a plate across the table. "Eat, then we'll see about branding those calves you've been putting off." He ate. The flapjacks were light, the fatback crisp, the coffee strong enough to float a horseshoe. When they stepped outside, the ranch looked different, smaller somehow, as if Minerva's presence had shrunk the horizon to a size 2 people could manage. Buck trotted at her heels, as if he had always belonged there. The milk cow lifted its head and mooed a greeting. Elias fetched the branding iron from the forge. Minerva rolled up her sleeves, revealing forearms corded with muscle. Together they worked the corral, cutting out calves with the efficiency of partners who had done this 1,000 times instead of 0. When a half-grown steer broke for the gap, Minerva simply stepped into its path, caught it by the horns, and wrestled it to the ground like a mother cat with a wayward kitten. Elias applied the iron. The calf bawled once and was released, none the worse for wear. By noon they had branded 20 head. Sweat glued Elias's shirt to his back, but the ache in his muscles felt clean, purposeful. Minerva wiped her forehead with the hem of her apron and surveyed the herd with satisfaction. "Not bad for a mail-order bride," she said. "Not bad for a schoolteacher," he replied. She laughed, and the sound carried clear to the cottonwoods where the bear had vanished. Elias felt something loosen in his chest, a knot he had not known was there. That afternoon they rode out to check the fence line. Elias saddled his gelding, a raw-boned bay named Scout. For Minerva he led out the Percheron mare he used for ploughing, 18 hands, broad as a barn door. She swung up with the ease of a cavalryman and settled her weight like she had been born to it. They rode knee to knee across the grass, the sun warm on their backs, the wind tasting of sage and distant rain. Halfway to the north pasture, they came upon a steer mired in a bog, left by spring runoff. The animal thrashed, sinking deeper. Elias dismounted, looped his rope around the saddle horn, and tried to drag it free. The steer bellowed. Scout laid back his ears and dug in, but the mud held fast. Minerva was off her horse before Elias could protest. She waded into the muck up to her thighs, wrapped her arms around the steer's neck and heaved. Muscles bunched beneath the wool dress like cables under sail. The steer came free, with a sound like a cork leaving a bottle. Minerva staggered back, coated to the waist in black slime. Laughing so hard, she had to sit down in the grass. Elias stared, rope forgotten. "You just pulled a 1,200-pound steer out of a bog with your bare hands." "Teamwork," she gasped between laughs. "You softened him up." They rode home at dusk, the rescued steer trailing behind on a lead rope. The sky burned orange and purple, the color of forge embers. Elias felt the day settle into his bones like good whiskey, slow, warm, inevitable. That night they sat on the porch steps sharing a jug of cider Elias had pressed the previous fall. Stars wheeled overhead. Somewhere a wolf howled, answered by another farther off. Minerva leaned back on her elbows, dress swapped for one of Elias's old shirts that fit her like a tunic. "Tell me about Clara," she said quietly. The name had not been spoken aloud in years. Elias took a long pull from the jug. She was small, delicate, loved flowers, tried to grow roses in this God-forsaken dirt, and cried when they died. He stared into the dark. "Died birthing our son. Doctor came too late. Buried them together under the cottonwood by the creek." Minerva was silent a long while. Then, "I'm sorry. Loss like that carves a man hollow." He nodded. "Been trying to fill the hollow with work. Doesn't take." "It will," she said. "Different shape, maybe. But it will." He looked at her then. Really looked. The strong column of her throat. The capable hands resting on her knees. The way moonlight silvered the braid across her shoulder. She was not beautiful in the way Clara had been, all porcelain and size. Minerva was beautiful, the way a thunderstorm is beautiful, vast, unstoppable, alive with power. "Minerva," he said, tasting her name like new whiskey. "Elias." He leaned over and kissed her. It was not tentative. Her lips were soft, despite the work they had done, tasting of cider and smoke. She kissed him back with the same steady confidence she brought to everything else. When they parted, the night felt charged, the air between them humming like a wire-pulled taut. Inside, the lamp had burned low. They climbed the ladder together. The bed creaked a protest, then accepted them. Elias traced the line of her shoulder, marveling at the strength beneath the skin. Minerva pulled him close, her breath warm against his ear. "Tomorrow," she whispered, "we'll fix the lean-to. Day after, we'll ride to town and make this legal. Tonight, we're just two people learning the shape of each other." He fell asleep to the rhythm of her heartbeat, strong and steady as a drum calling him home. The next weeks unfolded like a story someone else had written and left for them to live. They repaired the barn, shored up the corral, butchered a steer and smoked the meat in the chimney. Minerva taught Elias to bake bread that rose higher than his hopes. He showed her the hidden spring where wild mint grew, and she brewed tea that tasted of summer. They spoke little of the past, much of the future, how many cattle the south pasture could carry, whether to plant corn or sorghum come spring, the possibility of a second room added to the cabin before winter. One evening, Pike returned with the mail, including a letter from the matrimonial agency demanding clarification about the discrepancy in Minerva's description. Elias read it aloud while Minerva peeled potatoes with a knife the size of a machete. "Tell them the truth," she said. "Tell them you got more than you bargained for, and wouldn't trade it for a dozen dainty brides." He wrote the letter by lamplight, sealing it with wax and a thumbprint of axle grease. Pike took it away, grinning like a man who had witnessed the punchline to a cosmic joke. Autumn painted the grass gold. The first frost silvered the pump handle. Elias woke one morning to find Minerva standing at the window, breath fogging the glass. "Snow by nightfall," she said. "I can smell it." They spent the day laying in firewood, stacking it high against the north wall. When the flakes began to fall, fat and silent, they stood on the porch watching the world erase itself, one layer at a time. Elias slipped an arm around her waist. She leaned into him, solid as an oak. Inside, the fire crackled. Minerva pulled a small package from her carpet bag, cloth-wrapped, tied with twine. She handed it to Elias. Open it, he did. Inside lay a quilt square, patchwork of blue and brown, stitched with tiny, careful stitches. In the center, two figures stood beneath a cottonwood tree, one tall, one taller, hands clasped. "For the wedding quilt," she said. "We'll add to it every year. Children, if they come. Grandchildren, dogs, whatever the Lord sends." Elias traced the stitches with a calloused thumb. Clara never finished hers. "This one will be different," Minerva promised. "This one will be ours." That night the snow piled against the door, and the wind howled like all the lonely years trying to get back in. Elias and Minerva lay tangled in the quilts, listening to the storm rage and pass. When morning came, the world was white and trackless, a new page waiting for their story. Elias kissed the top of her head. "Reckon we'd best get to writing it." Minerva smiled against his chest. "Reckon we'd best." And somewhere beyond the cottonwoods, the bear slept its winter sleep, dreaming of a woman who had sung it into the dark with nothing but courage and a hymn. The ranch, once a place of silence and waiting, had become a country of two, vast enough for miracles.